Doctor Who, The Missing Adventures Books Review. Hello and welcome to another video. Last time, a couple of weeks ago, I did a review of the entire New Adventures range from Virgin, and now I'm going to cover their sister series, The Missing Adventures, original novels featuring adventures with previous pre-7th Doctor versions of the Doctor. This series ran for 3 years from 1994 to 1997 and ultimately amounted to 33 novels. 5 books with the first Doctor, 5 books with the second Doctor, 6 with the third, 9 with the fourth, 5 with the fifth, 5 with the sixth, and just 1 featuring the 7th Doctor for obvious reasons. The first book in the series is Goth Opera, written by Paul Cornell. Cornell had already made a name for himself as a New Adventures writer and was a reasonably obvious choice to launch the Missing Adventures range, though this would be his only book in this series. Goth Opera is basically a vampire novel. It is a sort of semi-sequel / prequel to the New Adventures book Blood Harvest by Terrance Dicks, and I like Blood Harvest. It's got vampires in it. Now, I really like Goth Opera. It's a really good start to the series. It's one of a very strong novel from Cornell. It's a nice, a vampire horror story. It's a really good 5th Doctor story. It's the prose style is as readable as ever. It's a really good kick-off to this new range, and it's a shame that he never wrote more of them, really. The second book in the series is Evolution by John Peele, which is a 4th Doctor book featuring Sarah Jane. This is a bit of a mishmash. It's obviously a kind of a homage to the Hinchcliffe era as a whole. On that level, it's okay as a sort of pastiche, though plot-wise, it's nothing really to write home about. It's okay. Hinchcliffeites will probably lap it up. The rest of us will probably just go, it's okay. The third book in the series is Venusian Lullaby by Paul Leonard, who had previously written, maybe it was after this, Toy Soldiers in the New Adventures range. This is a First Doctor Ian and Barbara story set on Venus. Can't say I was a big fan of this, to be honest. It's an attempt to do a very alien world and a very alien culture. I suppose you could... It doesn't really remind you of the First Doctor's era. I suppose you could charitably say that it's a bit Web Planet-esque. But I find it very difficult to get into and very difficult to care about. The 4th book in the series is The Crystal Beautifulless by new writer Craig Hinton. Now, The Crystal Beautifulless is a sort of a tongue-in-cheek adventure story with the 5th Doctor, Tegan, Turlough and Chameleon, and it's okay. This is one of those books that, and there's probably more of them in the Missing Adventures than there are the New Adventures. Though it kind of reminds you of some of Gareth Roberts' New Adventures, and it's okay. It's readable, it's entertaining, and it's just a little bit forgettable. The next book in the series is State of Change by Christopher Beulis, who likewise had started off in the New Adventures. State of Change features the 6th Doctor and Perry, and it's sort of a pseudo-historical that turns out to have an old villain in it. This is basically exactly the same as The Crystal Beautifulless in what I just said about it. It's readable, it's tongue-in-cheek, it's not terribly complicated, it's perfectly readable. You just don't remember it very much after you've read it. The next book in the series is The Romance of Crime, which is the Missing Adventures debut of Gareth Roberts. And I have to say, this pretty much exemplifies the theory that Gareth Roberts worked much better in the Missing Adventures range than he did in the New Adventures range. The Romance of Crime is the first original novel featuring the 4th Doctor, Romana II, and Canine. And it's pretty much a legendary book. I mean, there's a reason this was chosen to be adapted as a Big Finish, because it just captures the feel both of that team and of the Williams era and of season 17 so beautifully. You really can see this on TV. It's all set on like a space station, and you can really kind of see it falling into the kind of studio-bound realms of the likes of Nightmare of Eden or Horns of Nimon. And it's really good. It's got Ogrons in it. It's got some fun, larger-than-life OTT characters, a wonderfully OTT villain. It's a really good... If you like the Williams era and season 17 especially, this is right up your alley, and it was right up my alley at the time. I think it was around this time that I was really starting to kind of focus in on that era and that period as being one of my absolute favourites. And the Romance of Crime was almost like an encapsulation of why that was. The next book in the series is The Ghosts of N-Space by former producer Barry Letts, and it features the Third Doctor, the Brigadier, and Sarah Jane. This is, of course, an adaptation of the radio play that was put out by the BBC in the early 90s that had John Pertwee and Elizabeth Sladen and Nicholas Courtney in it. It's not very good. The radio play wasn't very good, and the book's not very good either. I think The Paradise of Death was previously novelised kind of on its own, away from it. Was it novelised? I can't quite remember. I think it must have been, but this was, they chose to make The Ghost of N-Space into a missing adventure, which is fair enough, really. Much like they kind of sort of adapted and expanded Shakedown, the video drama, and made that into a new adventure. Again, it's not very good, because it's not a very good story. The next book in the series is Time of Your Life by Steve Lyons, which it's basically a Sixth Doctor story. It's sort of a satirical future Running Man sort of thing. It's okay. It introduces like a new companion in the form of a young male computer nerd called Grant Markham. Why is the bigger question, considering he makes a grand total of one other appearance in the entire canon, as far as I'm aware. It seems a little bit pointless to me. But this is okay. The next book is Dancing the Code by Paul Leonard, making a fairly speedy return after Venusian Lullaby. And this is a Third Doctor, Joe, and Unit story. And it's a much more kind of grounded a Third Doctor story than The Ghost of N-Space. It's basically a traditional sort of alien invasion story with perhaps a little bit more graphic nature to it at times. I thought this was pretty good. It was one of those that didn't really live up to subsequent reads, but I really, really enjoyed it the first time. And it does do a really good job of capturing, the Unit family at that time. The next book in the series is The Menagerie by Martin Day. This features the Second Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe. So it's basically the first original Second Doctor story. Unfortunately, it's not very good. I can't really remember very much about it. I don't think I have this one. I think I got it from the library and rented it. I don't think I ever bought it. I could be wrong. It might be somewhere, but I don't think so. And I don't recall being very impressed, so... The next book in the series is System Shock by Justin Richards. I think this is his debut. He would go on... No, he did Theatre of War, didn't he, first? But this is one of his first books. And he went on to actually be Ranger Editor for, I think, the 8th Doctor books, possibly the Past Doctor Adventures as well, for BBC books. And he wrote many, many more. This is a 4th Doctor, Sarah Jane and Harry story. It's sort of like it's an alien invasion story, kind of techno alien invasion with a bit of V thrown in, because I think they're like lizard aliens posing as humans, and it's set in the 90s, which is a little bit weird. I often find it a little bit weird when we do past Doctor stories set in an accurate contemporary setting that obviously would not have been done during their original run, because nobody would have predicted, the 90s totally accurately and 90s technology. I always find that a bit strange when they do that. It just doesn't feel quite right to me somehow. System Shock, I think it's a very popular book. I always find it just kind of okay. I think Richards wrote a lot better books. Actually, I think this book's sequel, which is called Millennium Shock, and is actually part of the BBC books Past Doctor range. They're supposed to be two different things, but they crossed over considerably. I actually think the second one was better than this one, but that's just my opinion. The next book in the series is The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Christopher Beulis, which has the first Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Susan. This is basically sort of like a sci-fi fantasy where the TARDIS crew arrive in a world where magic and all of its secundant fantasy cliches seems to be real, but of course the first Doctor's not having it. There has to be another explanation. It's like many of Christopher Beulis's books in that it's perfectly readable and it's entertaining, and there's nothing in it that's going to either bore you or offend you or seem like out of character or out of canon, but at the same time it doesn't really do anything to make it overly memorable. It's good, don't get me wrong, it's perfectly readable, but it's not a favourite. The next book in the series was Invasion of the Cat People by Gary Russell, who had written Legacy for the New Adventures, and of course he was DWM editor and co-creator of something of Big Finish, I think. This is a second Doctor story with Ben and Polly, and it's about an invasion by cat people, as the title suggests. I wasn't a fan of this one. I'm not a big fan of Russell. I didn't mind Legacy, but a lot of his books just seem to me to be fairly bland and nondescript, sometimes bordering on fan wank. This one just didn't do anything for me, and I gave it like several passes, and a lot of people seem to like it. I think, at least at the time, it didn't do anything for me. The next book is Menagera by Stephen Marley, which is a Fourth Doctor and Sarah book. This is it's doing something a little bit more ambitious than Evolution did, even though it's clearly kind of set in the Hinchcliffe mould. It's trying to do something a little bit more ambitious rather than just being a pastiche. Again, I was not a fan of this one. Again, I think it's got fairly good reviews at the time. I don't know whether anybody talks about it at all now. It kind of left me cold. The next book is Millennial Rights by Craig Hinton, which is a Sixth Doctor and Mel story. This is basically another Great Intelligence story. It's sort of like supposedly the third Great Intelligence story, even though I think Downtime was coming out at the same time and also being a third Great Intelligence story. So I think I can't really remember. It's a lot. I think something happens on the stroke of midnight on the turn of the century, 1999, and London gets turned into a kind of weird parallel version of itself or something like that. This was okay. A lot of people loved this at the time. Again, I just thought it was okay. A lot of these are just kind of, a lot of them don't really kind of stand out. They're not bad. You can't sit here and do a 10-minute rant on them, but very few actually kind of make you go, oh, that's brilliant, like say the Romance of Crime did. It's just sort of okay. The next book is The Empire of Glass by Andy Lane. This is a First Doctor Stephen and Vicky story. I think it's set in Venice or something like that. I think this is another one that I don't actually have. I didn't get it at the time for some reason. I think I may have got it out of the library at some point. I may not have finished it. I really don't remember anything about this. Oh dear. I think it probably around this time I was starting to get a little bit, losing interest perhaps a little bit. Again, possibly because, the books were sort of mediocre, honestly. They weren't really bad, like some of the New Adventures books are bad, like painfully bad, and you could rant on them. They're just sort of middlingly ordinary. The next book in the series is Lord of the Storm by David A. Mckinty. It's a Fifth Doctor and Turlough story with the Sontarans. And again, this is like supposed to be a sci-fi kind of action adventure. But again, it's kind of stunted a little by the writer's prose style. As with First Frontier in the New Adventures, which was trying to do like a 50s B-movie pulp sci-fi thing, this is trying to do like an action adventure. But his prose style just doesn't really convey much pace or excitement, and just doesn't really do anything for me. The next book in the series is Downtime by Mark Platt. This is an adaptation / expansion of the video with the Brigadier, Sarah Jane, Victoria, and the Great Intelligence, and the Yeti, which was released in 1995. Now, I have to say, even though it was written by Mark Platt, who wrote the video, I wasn't a big fan of the book. The video version is better. I know the video version, a lot of fans don't even know about it. So many more haven't even seen it, and some people don't like it because it is a fairly low budget. I always liked the video of Downtime. I always rewatch it every few years. It's more than worth it for Nicholas Courtney alone. And obviously you don't have that in the book version. It's I guess if you like novelizations, it's okay, but to me it just struck me as a little bit redundant. Just watch the video, man. That's what I do. The next book in the series is The Man in the Velvet Mask by Daniel Mahoney, which is the First Doctor and Dodo. This was a very weird one. It was a very controversial one, I think. It's got lots of like weird sadomasochism, sexuality, some of which involving Dodo. To do with the Makeda Sard or something like that. I think I tried to read it. Again, the writing style just... What? I have no idea what the hell it was about. I really don't. The next book is The English Way of Death, which is a return of Gareth Roberts, writing again another Fourth Doctor, Romana and Canine story, which has again been adapted by Big Finish. And again, this is another standout in a range that doesn't necessarily have a lot of standouts. I don't think it's quite as good as Romance of Crime, but it's not far off. This is more, and again, it's very season 17. It's very Williams era. It's very... This is, if Romance of Crime was kind of like the studio-bound Nightmare of Eden, Horns of Nimon, this is much more kind of location, City of Death, Shardar kind of style of adventure. And again, it's a lot of fun, and if you love the era, you'll probably like the book. The next book in the series is The Eye of the Giant by Christopher Beulis. This is the Third Doctor, Liz and Unit story. I think it's got something to do with some island where there are like prehistoric monsters or something. Again, this is one I didn't buy, but I did get from the library, and I read, and I seem to remember that I kind of liked the first 3/4 of the book. The first 3/4 of the book that kind of focus on that premise were really entertaining and fun. And then it kind of wandered off and started doing something else in the last third of the book, and I was like, what? I don't know. It's okay. The next book in the series is The Sands of Time by Justin Richards, which features the Fifth Doctor, Tegan and Nyssa. This is basically a sequel to Pyramids of Mars, albeit done in kind of more like a global, kind of globe-trotting adventure. It's a fairly ballsy thing to do, to try and do a sequel to a story that's that venerated. Even though I'm not a massive fan, I think it's okay, but somewhat overrated. The Sands of Time again, it's okay. Again, I think Justin Richards actually got much better later on, and some of his later books were a lot better. It's just sort of okay. It's readable. The next book in the series is Killing Ground by Steve Lyons. This is basically a follow-up to, well, sort of a follow-up to Time of Your Life. It's simply in the fact that it has that Grant guy as the companion for the second and only time. This has the Cybermen in it. Again, this is another one that I never bought. I read it from the library. I seem to recall thinking it was pretty decent. It's quite a decent Cyberman story with some quite scary stuff, some horrific stuff with the Cybermen. Again, I have not read it for a very long time. The next book is The Scales of Injustice by Gary Russell, which is the third Doctor Liz and Unit story. I think it's like a Silurian story. As with a lot of Russell's books, it's got an okay premise. It just doesn't really do anything for me. Oh well. The next book is The Shadow of Weng Chayang. Again, I don't think I have this. I think I've probably rented it at some time, borrowed it, whatever you call it. Again, it's like this is like Sands of Time. This is another sequel to. This has got the Romana 1 and K9 in it. This is another sequel to, a much loved classic story. And this lives up to it even less than Sands of Time. I seem to recall just finding this bafflingly boring, honestly. Again, I'm not a fan of Mckinty. Sorry. The next book is Twilight of the Gods, which is Christopher Beulis again. It's a second Doctor Jamie Victoria story. I think this is actually a sequel to The Web Planet. I don't think I've ever read this, so... Oh well. The next book is Speed of Flight by Paul Leonard, which features the third Doctor and Joe. Doing these, there's actually more than I thought that I don't have. This is like an alien world one with, for some reason, Mike Yates is in it. I think I got this from the library. I don't think I was very impressed. The next book in the series is The Plotters by Gareth Roberts. It's another Gareth Roberts book. This time around, however, it's using a different TARDIS team, which is the first Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Vicky. And it proves that, he's not just limited to writing Fourth Doctor stories. This is basically a tongue-in-cheek historical around the gunpowder plot. And I actually do recall finding this a lot of fun. I have heard that he doesn't like Vicky or something, and he was like putting her down or something as being useless, which is a very strange thing to do considering how much more proactive and useful she was than Susan. but I have to be honest, I never noticed that. I didn't notice anything like that in the book. I thought it was good fun. Again, it's been a long time since I read it, and I wouldn't quite put it up with the other two of his earlier on, but I thought this was an enjoyable First Doctor tongue-in-cheek historical. I didn't see anything to complain about with this. I thought it was fine. Again, one of the better Missing Adventures books, in my opinion. The next book in the series is Cold Fusion by Lance Parkin, which is a Fifth Doctor book with Adric and Nyssa and Tegan, but also kind of crosses over into the New Adventures version of the Seventh Doctor with his New Adventures companions Roz and Chris. This was much hyped at the time, and I think it's actually been adapted by Big Finish. I've not heard the audio. I did not like the book. Again, it's got a lot of hype, and a lot of people seem to like it. I found it really, really boring. Again, I don't think Lance Parkin's style really did much for me. I couldn't even tell you what the plot was, honestly. I know that it left me fairly cold. The next book in the series is Burning Heart, which is written by Dave Stone, who wrote some of my least favourite New Adventures. It's supposedly a funny writer, but it just never really gelled with me. I have to be honest, I'm not sure I've ever read this. I'm pretty sure I don't have it. And I'm reading the plot description, and I remember absolutely nothing about it. I probably just skipped it and didn't even bother borrowing it or anything, because that writer just left me baffled. The next book in the series is A Device of Death, which is written by Christopher Beulis again. This is basically a Fourth Doctor, Sarah and Harry story. It's again. I don't think I've ever read this. I'm sorry. I did not realise there were so many that I hadn't read, or if I have read it, I've completely forgotten it. Given that it's Christopher Beulis, it's probably readable but forgettable. Oh well. The next book is The Dark Path. This is the penultimate book in the series. It features the second Doctor, Jamie and Victoria, and it basically has a pre-TV canon introduction for the Master in it, the Delgado Master. That's again, that could be an interesting enough idea, but it's David A. Mckinty, and he somehow, to me, again, I don't want to slag him off. Some people seem to like his stuff, but to me, he always had the ability to turn an interesting premise into something quite boring. And again, I borrowed this. I did not buy it, and it just did nothing for me. It just bored me. Sorry. The next book in the series, and the final book in the series, is The Well-Mannered War, which is written by Gareth Roberts and brings back the Fourth Doctor, Romana and K9 team, which, seems like a pretty good way to round off the series, bringing back its most popular author. And clearly they were probably the most popular books were those Fourth Doctor, Romana and K9, Romana 2 and K9 stories. This is The Well-Mannered War. This is an Alien World one. Unfortunately, I have to be honest, I don't really like The Well-Mannered War. It's my least favourite. I've never, I don't think I ever bothered getting the adaptation from Big Finish, which I did the other two. But the book, I was really disappointed by it at the time, and I've tried to read it a couple of times since, and it just doesn't do it for me. It just doesn't. It doesn't capture the essence of the era as well as his other two, which, considering that was kind of the, presumably that was the reason why they chose him to exit the books, because, those books had been so popular. It just feels a bit weird, and there's this weird ending, which, I don't know, seems to be both a commentary on Virgin losing the books license, and, the show was never any good again after J&T took over, or some such fucking horse shit. Yeah, it doesn't work for me. I found this one very disappointing, especially how much I loved the first two, and even how much fun I found the plotters with a different TARDIS team. This is an example of something that should have been much better than it is. I've heard some people say they love it. I've even heard some people say it's their favourite, but I don't know why, because it did nothing for me at all. I found it very disappointing in comparison to the others. And that is The Missing Adventures. This is somewhat short-lived, and this video is considerably shorter than the New Adventures, of course. Although, of course, they basically carried on under a different name. The Past Doctor Adventures, when BBC Books took over within a couple of months, and many of the same authors even came back. I am surprised by how many of these I haven't got, and even a couple that I haven't read. I think it's probably a testament to the fact that I was somewhat disappointed by a lot of them, and it just didn't do it for me. I do think the New Adventures were generally better, whereas I mean, again, I'm speaking from memory. If and when I actually do the videos, I may change my mind, but I seem to think that the BBC books Past Doctors were better, at least for me, than the Eighth Doctor ones, whereas I think the NAs were definitely better than the MAs, which, for the most part, apart from a few standouts, mainly Gareth Roberts's, and possibly Goth Opera, seemed just a little bit kind of to me, rather than really, I mean, the New Adventures, for all their faults, they do have many, many standouts. And they do something different, whereas these are kind of, I mean, I get that these were more the point to be more traditional Doctor Who, but you can be traditional and still be a bit more original than we got in a lot of these books. So, yeah, not the biggest fan. We will see if and when I do the videos exactly what I think of the Eighth Doctor books and the Past Doctor ones. Anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. Bye for now.